Our next speaker was to be Sarah Yates. Regrettably, she can't make it today, but she's very kindly recorded a session which will be played by video for all of you. A short background: Sarah Yates and Paige Hobbs are co-founders of Alongside, a psychologist and publicist respectively. In 2015, they combined their professional skills and personal experiences as emergency service and defence partners to develop an Australian-first model of proactive education and support for the partners and families of Australia's front line. Please sit back and enjoy this video presentation, ladies and gentlemen.
The morning of September 11 dawned peacefully over the United States. Afterwards, people would describe the air as clear, crisp, a perfect autumn day in New York City. Within hours, of course, everything changed. 2,977 people went to work that day, kissed their families goodbye, and never came home. Of all of the images made infamous on September 11, the one that sticks with me is of the firefighters running up the stairs of the World Trade Center as hundreds of people moved down the stairs in the opposite direction. The camera has captured the eyes of the fireman in the lead. They are wide, alert, resolute, determined to save as many people as he could. There was no fear, no hesitation in his gaze. He was running towards the danger while everyone else was running away. He was encouraging people to flee the very horrors he was steadfastly moving towards. I doubt there could have been a good enough reason for him to change direction and exit the tower that day. He continued into that building knowing he had a wife, children, reasons to stay alive, and yet still he ran. The man in that photo survived the collapse of the Twin Towers that day, unlike 411 of his colleagues, the men and women of the NYPD and the NYFD who lost their lives that day. That man is a hero. But here's the thing about heroes. They go home at the end of their shifts. They play with their kids, do the groceries. They have relationships, sleep, make love. They have a life outside their work. It's not like the movies where Bruce Willis kills all the bad guys, saves the day, smokes the cigars and heads off into the sunset with the gorgeous blonde in the smoking hot car. In the real world, heroes have to live with the things they see and do every day while somehow maintaining a life. Heroes have to be human. I wonder what life has looked like for those frontline workers who survived 9/11. Who held them when they cried? Who got them help when the broken and mangled bodies, the crumpled steel and the stench of death returned to them in their dreams? And for the 20% of New York's emergency service workers who have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder since 9/11, I wonder who has kept them alive as they fell apart. For most of us, when we have a bad day at work, we get to come home and unload to our partners, our support networks, our loved ones. We get to bitch about our day, pour a glass of wine, and feel better once we've done so. For most of us, we used our loved ones for what they are, the strongest protective factors against stress and mental illness. For the people on Australia's front line, our defence and emergency service personnel, they often don't get that opportunity. The nature of what they see and do places a barrier between them and their loved ones, whether that is to protect their partners from the horrors of their work or because there are legal restrictions on what they are able to discuss. Frontline personnel often do not have the luxury of unloading their bad days once they finish work. Imagine that. Your worst of worst days at work, and you cannot tell your partner. Now imagine that that is every day, for a year, for a decade, for a career. How hard it must be to have your partner in front of you offering help and assistance and to not be able to hear or accept it. How lonely. Who would you turn to if you couldn't talk to your partner and your family? Would you talk to someone, or would you let it snowball and build up over time? Like the vast majority of his colleagues, my husband, a veteran WA police detective of 17 years, turned to no one. One Easter, a crisp, clear Perth autumn morning, 2 months after our engagement, Adrian was called to a murder in the southern suburbs of our city where he worked as a detective. As the first on scene, Adrian was confronted by a man on a veranda covered in blood, telling him not to go in the house because it was pretty bad in there. With the same resolution in his eyes, Adrian walked into a scene from a B-grade horror movie. A body, blood on the walls, pooling and congealing on the floor. He didn't know it then, but that sight would send him mad. Months later, after a slow descent into relationship dysfunction, anger, aggression, only 8 weeks before our wedding, I woke one night in the early hours to the sound of running water from the bathroom. Disoriented in the darkness, I tried to piece together the puzzle, with the biting words from our latest fight echoing in my mind. I stumbled, half awake, into the bathroom and was confronted by the sight of the man I considered to be a hero, infallible and unbreakable, lying crumpled in the bottom of the shower, where he'd been for 3 hours. As I looked at him, the water coursing over him, his head in his hands, I felt my world shift. It was subtle, but it was irreversible. In that moment, everything I knew to be true had changed. I climbed in with him, fully clothed, the freezing water taking my breath away. I sat with him. I held him as he trembled until he finally found the words, "I think something is really wrong." All I could say was, "I know." PTSD is a mental illness that occurs after witnessing or experiencing a critical incident, life-threatening event, or trauma. Due to the volume of stress and trauma they are exposed to, emergency service and defence personnel are roughly 4 times more likely to succumb to this illness than the general population. It manifests as anger, aggression, night terrors that drench the sheets in sweat, flashbacks, hypervigilance, and often alcohol and drug abuse. In the 9 years, 1 month, and 11 days between Adrian's diagnosis and today, the snowball of stress and trauma that led to his breakdown has become evident. The murder wasn't the defining moment, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And you know, the worst thing is, I had no idea it was happening. I was his wife, and he never told me the things in his job that were staying with him. He wanted to protect me, to keep me shielded from the sights and the smells. He describes it now as wanting to keep me clean, to keep me pure. Doing that cost him his mental health. It cost him his family, and it very nearly cost him his life. It is a cruel irony that the nature of frontline work attacks and erodes the very thing that most protects personnel from developing a mental illness as the result of their work. More than anyone, frontline personnel need to rely on their support networks to help them successfully navigate the stress and trauma that are in their roles. More than anyone, though, they don't. As a result, they are more likely to have their relationships fail. Their kids are more likely to have a mental illness, just by virtue of the job that they do. That is an extraordinary price to pay for keeping their communities safe, for keeping all of us safe. It is a price that is paid by the estimated 30% of Australia's frontline that will be diagnosed with PTSD throughout their service, by the 1,300 New South Wales police officers that have been medically retired due to psychological injury in the last 5 years, by the 35 defence veterans that took their lives in 2016, and by the 17 defence and emergency service personnel who have already taken their lives this year. It's one a week. It's a price I've paid, that my daughters have paid. If you ask me, PTSD is a thief, a bastard of a thing that robbed me of a life with the person I loved, that robbed him of the life he deserved as a man, a husband, a father, and a hero. I want to say that in some ways, grieving a death would be easier, although I don't know if that's true. What I do know is that I grieve the loss of the man still standing in front of me every day. Because of that, it is the grief that never ends. Most of the words my husband speaks to me are at best indifferent, at worst unpleasant, vindictive, manipulative, and hurtful. The rare, unsolicited expression of love and affection is so unexpected and so surprising it makes me catch my breath and brings tears to my eyes. He has stood over me in a kitchen after I dropped a jar of olives, splattering the floor and cupboards with black, oily liquid. As I sat in the puddles collecting shards of glass and marinated fruit, he chastised me from above about how useless I was, how clumsy, how stupid. At its worst, he would leave for work and I would hold my babies, breathe in their smell, and wonder if today would be the day he would use his department-issued firearm to end the torture in his mind. I would wonder if today would be the day I got that phone call. If today should be the day I made a phone call and finally told his boss that his firearm access should be revoked. I would wonder if I should break his trust and confidentiality in order to keep him alive. There is nothing more terrifying as a wife than knowing your husband has access to lethal force when you feel he could use it against him. I'm not alone in this fear, nor is this fear unrealistic. Suicide by department-issued firearm has happened many times across Australia in the last decade. It's happened twice this year. It can also be incredibly lonely. Adrian moved out last June after 8 years living with his illness, with the emotional and verbal abuse that PTSD can bring. I broke. The illness won. I still have hope that we are able to be a family again, and I still wear the rings he gave me on our wedding day. I have no idea if that hope is misguided. What I do know is that the price we paid for the job Adrian does is too high. I believe what it has cost us is unacceptable. As a result of my experiences and the experiences of my co-founder, Paige Hobbs, the not-for-profit Alongside was launched in 2015. The only organisation in Australia to combat the excessive rate of mental injuries, relationship breakdowns and suicide that occurs within our frontline populations by providing proactive education and support services to partners and families. Australia's frontline organisations aren't the type to have a sharing circle after a bad day. The stigma around mental health on the frontline is a complex beast to change, a very difficult process, where change is ripe and ready and desperately willing, though, is in the family space. But here's the problem. Frontline personnel do not share with their loved ones because partners don't have the skills to handle the information. They want to protect partners from the reality of their work. There isn't even often a way to start those dialogues. Hell, I'm a qualified psychologist and even I couldn't do it. So what hope do partners with no training have? At least, this used to be the problem. Alongside is unique because before us, no organisation was including families as part of the solution to this insidious social issue. No organisation was working from recruit level to offset the things we know are more likely to happen when you work on Australia's front line. It's not enough to work in the crisis space once mental illness and divorce is occurring. We have to act before it starts to enable families to talk and support the person working on the front line from the start of their career. Alongside has recognised the need to mobilise frontline families, to better educate them to be the strongest protective factors against mental illness. In order for someone on the front line to stay mentally healthy, we need to consider the hero to be the whole family unit. The family is an essential part of the solution, and Alongside provides the training they need to be exactly that. Society can no longer prioritise the individual over the partnership. It isn't working. People are dying. Westpac realised the potential of Alongside and me as its co-founder when we were little more than an idea. Winning one of the inaugural Westpac Social Change Fellowships in 2016 was an incredible gift. Nothing short of the enabler Alongside needed to transition from an idea to a fully fledged not-for-profit with offices in 3 states. The flexibility of the fellowship to be used by the individual in an autonomous way allowed me to complete research work across Australia with hundreds of frontline families to better understand their experiences and needs from a never-before attempted service such as ours. As a direct result of the Westpac Fellowship, Alongside has become so much more than Paige and me at my dining room table. It has always been my greatest wish that Alongside could stop families from experiencing the irreversible damage that my family has been through these last 9 years. The fellowship allowed that to happen. A few weeks ago, a woman from Katherine in the Northern Territory asked to speak with me. She thanked me for alongside and the work we were doing. She told me the education program we've written as a result of the research in the fellowship gave her the confidence to tell her husband, a veteran police officer of 9 years' service, that she was worried about his mental health. She told him she thought he was getting sick and she did not feel like he was treating her as well as he used to. She started a conversation she would not have started without alongside the support we had given her, the support the fellowship has given me. It brought tears to my eyes as she told me her husband was now receiving psychological assistance and they were making changes as a family. Alongside now has contracts in 3 states with defence and emergency service organisations. We're growing faster than we can manage for an organisation not even 2 years old. We need help to manage this growth so that we can be there from the start, every step of the way, because every person protecting Australia deserves to have a family, their health and their life. It costs frontline services $1 million per staff member across the first 5 years of service. Thanks to the research work completed by the fellowship, for about $600,000, just over half of that per person cost for 1 year, Alongside can provide these services to an entire state worth of frontline families in a world-first program of proactive intervention. It's a no-brainer. As we expand so rapidly, I rely heavily on the Westpac Foundation. The Social Change Fellows from 2016 have sat around a table full of empty coffee mugs, scrunched up paper, and workshopped alongside. They've carried me when I thought our not-for-profit would fail. And yes, they've provided coffee and maybe wine. As Westpac alumni, I have at my disposal some of the brightest and most innovative minds in Australia, if only I reach out to them. Over the past 15 months, I've come to view the Westpac Bicentennial Foundation as part of the Alongside team, part of my family. I could not have done it without them. The Bicentennial Foundation is full of people with influence and resources that every scholar can access to assist them in changing the world. As Alongside looks to the future, it is my job to seek out those willing to help us change the lives of the 450,000 frontline families across Australia. And the Foundation has been instrumental in helping me to do that. As it always does, the Social Change Fellowship and the Westpac Bicentennial Foundation allows me to go forth from this place with an unwavering resolve to continue to change the way we deliver education to our frontline families. I want to greet you again one day and tell you that Alongside has saved relationships, helped people open up to their loved ones, kept people alive. I want to continue to change the world so that I can look at my daughters one day and tell them that what our family went through was not for nothing. After all, no one should have to be a hero on their own. Thank you.